Hi, Tim Talbot here. Unfortunately, when we're recording the podcast with Phillip Toews, we did have some audio issues. Unfortunately, I did not catch the audio issues until after the full recording was done. I do think that this episode deserves to be released because it's such a great one. Appreciate you listening. I do understand that it will be choppy at times, but it's well worth the listen. Thank you and enjoy. Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Attain Wealth Planning Podcast. I'm your host, Tim Talbot, and today we're joined by Phillip Toews. Really excited for this one because it's very related to what I do, and I think it's a really good person to be a major voice in the behavioral finance and risk managed investing. I think a lot of people are going to listen to this and get some really good stuff. Today, my guest, Phillip Toews, he's the CEO and portfolio manager at Toews Asset Management. He's built a reputation on an innovative approach to help investors not just manage their money, but also their mindset, which you'll hear is kind of the bigger challenge, like understanding risk, kind of figuring out what you do as you transition throughout your life and how to handle a lot of the volatility we've been kind of facing. He's also the author of a powerful new book called The Behavioral Portfolio, Managing Portfolios and Investor Behavior in a Complex Economy. I read it, I like it, and like I said, I have a really good book here because I think I have one of the first copies before it was released, and it's signed, so not many people can say that. So it's actually usually up there in my office. I have a little collection of all my memorabilia, and it's got a place up there. So you may have seen him on CNBC, Bloomberg, Fox Business. He's a go-to expert in the media for years. You come across my LinkedIn feed every once in a while, and I don't even, from people I don't follow, like, oh, hey, I know that guy. So why this is so nice is because we have a good relationship, but I haven't really heard your story either. So for me, this is new. And this is kind of why I like stuff like this, is now we're going to get to hear what got you to where you're at. Because I know the you now. I don't know the you before and the you throughout the years. So really excited to dive deeper, and thank you for joining me.
Great to be here, Tim.
Yeah. So like I said, the kind of a little bit of some feedback for you as we talked before you came in here. Just kind of get to know you a little bit, your story, where you grew up, and kind of what got you to where you're at, and maybe some tips for people that either want to get in this industry in some way, shape, or form. I think you have a different piece of the industry than I do, I'd say. But kind of start from the beginning. What was your childhood like? I think you live in New York City now. Are you from New York City?
No, I'm from Kansas, but not just. It's like, well, Kansas is more of a obviously Midwestern, potentially rural situation, but it was from kind of in the middle of nowhere part of Kansas, in Little Kansas.
Okay.
So it's down near Oklahoma border. The nearest, so it was a town of 20,000, but the nearest kind of city was Wichita, which is a 5-hour drive away. So it wasn't even in the suburbs. It was like, we were pretty remote.
Would you consider it country, or?
No, it was like this little town, but the thing is, it just wasn't near a city. So I think that influenced what kind of town it was. And it was pretty insular in a way because of that. This is obviously before all the kind of electronic communications we have now. So really, we had our world, and what's China, what's whatever. It was just I think that the defining characteristic is not near a city. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I think that's pretty interesting because I think we take for granted where the world is now, where you can look at your phone and see something that's happening in a completely place on the other side of the world, and it can literally affect what you're doing currently, and it's kind of a crazy idea. So you grew up in Kansas. I've never been to Kansas. I haven't been to a lot of states. You'll find out.
Yeah.
What was it like? I mean, how was your childhood like? Was it?
I mean, it was great. I mean, we didn't know anything else, and my dad was a principal at a grade school that I happened to attend. I told the other kids that he had an electric paddle. I have no idea what that means.
Oh, funny.
So that was one of the things I would say. But it was wonderful. I mean, we had great parents. We had the freedom to, that was in an age. I live in New York City now.
Right.
And, at a very young age, we were walking to school and riding our bikes all around the town, right? And so in New York City, our kids are really parented. They're not going out when they're 10 years old wandering around Seventh Avenue or whatever. So it's a very different environment for sure.
I feel like even that in general, my wife and I talk about this all the time. Just the idea, like the world is different. I remember growing up, I grew up in Attica. So that was or not Attica. I grew up in Attica, but before that I lived in Batavia, outskirts. I consider it country for the most part. Yeah. And growing up, I mean, we just ride our bike wherever. Oh, yeah. And no one cared. Now it's like the idea of my 7-year-old son just going out and doing whatever and me not knowing where it's just, and I'm in the suburbs.
Yeah.
So
I don't know exactly what the mortality rate was back then relative to now.
Yeah.
I mean, we were jumping ramps on bikes, all kinds of things. I don't think we'd be doing it now, but anyway.
No, yeah, it's a different world now for sure. So when you were a kid and you were in high school and stuff like that, what was your dream job? Obviously, you're a portfolio manager now. Was that something you wanted to do for your life, or did you?
No, I didn't even know what that was. Right? I didn't even know what money was, more or less. Well, actually, I didn't know what money was, but I didn't know what money management was. I don't recall what I was thinking when I was in high school, but I do know that my mom. So, right. I mean, we lived in what my mom was telling me was a 1,200 square foot 3-bedroom house. And she told me that I would always say from the age of 10 on that I wanted to be rich and have a maid and live in the big city. So I have no idea what any definition around that, but she said that that's what I would always say. And I don't even think I knew what that meant either, because we hadn't been to a lot of big cities. I remember coming into Wichita when I was a teenager, being in awe at the strip malls, so that's how remote it was.
Yeah, it's different. And it was similar for me. So growing up, we just didn't have, there was stuff by us.
Yeah.
We lived in the Attica prison. So I don't know if you know where the Attica prison is.
I mean, I've only heard
of the riots, stuff like that.
No,
so,
I mean, yeah. Okay.
But I mean, we had a Thompson, a couple of small spots, but that was pretty much it. It wasn't a 5-hour drive or whatever. So little different.
Yeah.
So obviously, I would say you're pretty close. I would say for your goal of being successful. I mean, from my perspective, you're very successful, which is good.
Thank you. Yeah.
And how do you think what kind of got you there? So you transitioned through high school and college or whatever that looks like. What was that moment for you that you were kind of found your direction, and what steps did you take to get there? I think, even from my perspective, the insurmountable amount of time and effort it would take to kind of get to the position you're at now is overwhelming. And you may not see it as much because you did all the work, but for someone on the outside looking in, that's a tough hill to climb, and you did it.
So one of the things I would say that I think is really pivotal in terms of this, overall in my life, and I won't reveal my age. I say I identify as a 36-year-old. That's far from the accurate number, but super early on, my dad had some rental properties, and I would help him out. And then I started my first business the summer after 7th grade. Okay. So it was a lawn mowing business. I went to what was then Gibson's, bought a lawnmower. I had a Chevy Nova, and I put an ad in the local newspaper. A kid wants to mow lawns. And I was mowing like 6 to 8 lawns a day during the summer. And my dad commented, it's like, I think you're making more money than I am as a principal during the summer. So it was that sort of that mindset of hey, you don't have to get a job, you can do something on your own, and then just doing it and being able to execute and have success at that. Sort of, I would say, because then I did that again in college. I started a company called College Painters, and I had 20 people working for me during the summers.
Oh wow!
And I put out ads and stuff like that. So it just got this mindset of like, that's the way you do it. You start a business, you innovate around how you launch it, you muddle through, you correct things, and you do that. So, and it continues to this day, right? I own I started Toews Asset Management a long time ago in 1995. And that's one of the things I'd say to think about, and even for people that have children, say like, so we don't give our kids an allowance. And last summer I said, like, why don't you each come up with a business to start? And my daughter now has a crocheting business. My son didn't actually execute on that idea, but like, that would be a piece of advice I would give.
And it's just so funny to me because, so my new employee, Connor, great guy. He just doesn't ever want to own it. And it's just
interesting.
The mentality sometimes it's very interesting because I'm not wired that way at all. My brain works. I want to own it. I talked about this on the last podcast. It's just one of those things. I could be mowing the lawn at 7 o'clock at night, and my brain will be going, working, whatever. And I'll be like, I got this great idea, or hey, I should do. That's how I. The issue sometimes with that is I try to do so much that we talk in the first episode of this. We talked about balancing. I think that's a big topic. How do you manage to balance it all? I mean, you have, this company you run essentially, and then you have the family life. Like, what do you do to kind of make sure that all? And then sometimes I think it's commingling it.
But so I obviously when I started my first companies, at like lawn mowing company and the College Painters company, I worked, and when I was the only person involved, I was obviously doing everything, but one of the things I've just sort of naturally done, and I think it does help create a balance, and balance is super important, right? If you're an entrepreneur and you're just working your entire life away, and you wake up and you're 60 and your family is like, who's that?
Right.
And I don't know if that's how desirable that pathway is, but I've the couple of things I've always delegated a lot, and even in the college painters thing, I started that. I hired painters, and then I hired people to oversee the painters, right? And so I was always sort of quick path to delegation. There's another thing though too, which is basically goes to what I would consider a flaw of mine, which is that I'm not really awesome at detail-oriented work, and in fact, I almost am repelled by it. So for me, one of the things that I've done is I've always surrounded myself with people that are executors. You know what I mean? That are able to focus on details, that are able to execute on the important points of the plan that you need to get things done. And so by surrounding myself with people like that are executing extremely well, I'm able to have a very good life-work balance. And some people say like, well, how do you do that? Like, how do you take a week or two off and you're not worried about it? It's like, no, all the execution's happening outside of me. And so that's another thing I would say to really think about is that, I used to go to Europe a lot, and I'd fly back, and you get that extra 6 hours.
Yeah.
So it's the longest day of the year.
Yeah.
When you're flying back.
Yeah.
And I would always plan out my life, and I would write down like, what do I want my life to be like on an hourly basis? Like, when I want to have breakfast, what do I want to do? When I want to stop working? And then I would just do that. And not work, until midnight, and it's worked great for me.
Yeah, that's one thing I've really tried to do a better job on. We talk about flaws. My flaw is that I work a lot because I really care, but sometimes it's tough. I'm not a very good delegator.
Okay.
Because I think it's that control aspect sometimes that if it's kind of like your baby, you work on it, you grow it, and you're always afraid that someone else is going to come in and put the wrong plant food in that you've always put in, and it might kill the plant, kind of thing.
Yeah.
And I've been doing much better. It's something I've been working on.
Okay.
And speaking about the habit stuff, so I have a book. You read Atomic Habits?
Yes.
So that's one thing I really kind of tried to implement this past year is I try to, a lot of the very successful people I've met throughout my life have done what you've done. They plan out their day. Hey, this is the time I want to do this. This is the time I want to do this.
Yeah.
So I try to do that in combination with small incremental changes. And I would say I'm still not where I want to be, but I'm doing better. And I think that's all you can ask for sometimes. So on that note, we talk about you owning a lot of your businesses.
Yeah.
What would you say is the worst job you've ever had?
Oh, well, I said my dad was the principal at an elementary school. For one summer or actually a year, I was an assistant to the janitor there. And so I was cleaning the toilets at the grade school. And I'm as I look back on just the visual imagery of that is not the best that I can think of. There's nothing wrong with that work, but it wasn't exactly my favorite. I remember cleaning the chalkboards every weekend with this oily sort of giant mop. And the smell of that coming up with me.
Not fun. Yeah, I never, I cleaned a lot of toilets. I was in a lot of food service jobs when I was, similar to you, when I was a kid, it was, hey, you want something, you go work for it.
So there you go. So, on the podcast, you just got me to talk about cleaning toilets. So
you won't hear that anywhere else.
Okay.
Kind of as you transition to where you're at now, we talked a little bit about this prior to you coming in here. How do you keep that drive? I think what a lot of people do is they have goals for themselves, which is great. And the issue that I kind of ran into is I had this goal for my life of where I want it to be. And I would say I hit that last year. And I was like, oh, this is awesome. I have everything that I kind of want to have. And then I was like, well, what's next? How do I keep myself going? And because I've always had that drive and I still have that drive, but I tried to find something else to get me. And I realized in my head, I don't need a specific goal to do that. But for some people, they do. So is there a time where you got to where you wanted to go and thought, what's next? Or are you still kind of just trucking along? And
well, so in my business, because we do we manage strategies that have loss avoidance mechanisms in them. Mm-hmm. So it's been it's a bit of a hot and cold marketing sort of trajectory where people really want our stuff when markets are more turbulent and they move lower. People want it less during bull markets. So we've had that constant challenge in terms of building the company. But, as you're asking the question, I was thinking that, it almost transcends the company now is not just me by a long shot. It's all the people that are making it work. It's people that, I operate with as partners. that are, as or maybe even more important than me. And so to a certain extent, the company kind of takes over where it's going to go,
right?
Because it needs not just for me to be successful, but the people at the company to be successful, and that in a way creates this need for better or for worse, a perpetual growth.
Right.
The other thing too, I would say, is that as you in the asset management business where I live, you're very quickly on the world stage, right? So success is super relative. We manage about $1 billion. We had an event in New York 2 weeks ago, and I was interviewing Joyce Choi. She's the head of director for fixed income for BlackRock. They manage $11 trillion.
Yeah.
So it really puts things in perspective. And so, and so that need of like growing for the company, growing for the people in the company, not just me, but also being on the world stage. And then there's some, in my view, some very major opportunities / problems that we can tackle on a world stage in terms of how can we evolve, how can we push forward asset management in a way that is better for investors.
Right.
And those are things that anyone can adopt. Anyone in the United States can adopt. Any investor can invest in our stuff. So it's but I guess I'll take all of that and just distill it down to another thing, which is that because the people in the organization are the right people, we're having fun.
Right.
So we're enjoying along the way on every pathway. It's not like this, we're banging down crucial, trying to grow, like banging on the table sort of perspective. It's more of like we're just having fun, and we're doing good things, and we're implementing change all at the same time.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's huge because I'm a big proponent of being yourself and having fun at work.
Yeah.
I think there's a level of, if you are who you say you are, people know that.
Yeah.
You shouldn't try to be someone else, and you should enjoy what you're doing. And I love my job, and I come to work in a good mindset. I'm positive. It's very rare you're going to see me. There is one occasion. There's a video I have to show you. So funny little story here. So about, bad mindsets. So I hate daylight savings time. I'm a huge proponent. Okay. So, because I hate losing an hour of sleep, because I'm a creature of habit. I can wake up at the same time every day. So talk about atomic habits. Back, fast forward when I got a puppy, and he was waking me up at like 5 a.m.
Oh, man. Okay.
Once he stopped, I was like, I'm going to keep waking up at 5 a.m. and go to the gym in the morning.
Okay.
So it's all going to kind of feed together. So daylight saving time hits. I lose an hour. So in my head, it's 4 o'clock in the morning. I'm going to the gym. And I woke up wrong. It just didn't feel like a good day. And I'm going to the gym, and I had my keys in my pocket, and I pull my keys out. As I'm pulling my keys out, I drop them. Well, don't you know the pipe, the drain pipes with the covers on them, the small little ones? Yeah. There's no cover on it. Perfectly down the drain. And I'm like, I can't get in my car. I can't get in the gym. It's 5:30 in the morning or whatever it is. I'm like, there's no way this just happened. So I just got my thing. I came in, I fished it out, and I just knew. Came to the office, the internet was down, nothing was working. I'm like, I'm going home. I'm not doing it today.
Wow,
so
that's amazing.
But little stories like that. So kind of gonna switch it up here a little bit of the questions. Sure. So in the first podcast I had someone that was on a billboard. So you get to officially one up them because you've been on TV. You're the first guest that's been on TV, which is cool. Yeah. That being said, a lot of times you've been on TV to talk about your new book. So yes. I don't know if you want to talk a little bit about the book and where they can find it and what that is. So
yeah, I would love to. Just as a reminder, it is written for investment advisors. But people on the writing reviews on Amazon are investors, and they said it's very good for investors too. So I'm saying that I believe that anyone can read it, and it's written in a way that anyone can digest it. But I'll give you the very brief crib notes of sort of what it's saying.
Okay.
The one thing that it's saying that I think is maybe the most important message is that, like in the world of behavioral coaching, the idea behind that is that, humans are not designed to make decisions in a way that is the best. And so you coach them to try to help them make better decisions. But I think that's the wrong starting place. The right starting place is, what does the portfolio look like? Is the portfolio designed in a way that meets economic and psychological needs of investors? And our point I make in the book is that if you take a conventional construct, which is just a 60-40 approach in stocks and bonds, that works the majority of the time, and it has actually worked quite well for the last 40 or 50 years, even taking into account some of the really turbulent markets we've had.
Right.
But if you look further back, you'll find examples, really two poignant examples. One is the Great Depression, when stocks lost money over 13 years, and if you were a balanced investor, 60-40 investor during that period, especially if you're drawing distributions of 4% or so, you'd run out of money. But even beyond that, I do a visualization of that period. It would be unnavigable. There's no way that any investor or any advisor even would be able to stick to that. There's another example of a 36-year bond bear market between 1945 and 1981 that would be perilous for very conservative investors. But the takeaway is this, that we're ignoring a part of history, and we're doing that at a time when some factors point that we could have adversity ahead, like high government debt, not just in the U.S., but other developed countries, and high valuations in equities, declining population growth in a lot of developed countries that set us up for the possibility of very negative markets. So what I say in the book is that, and the idea of the behavioral portfolio is creating a portfolio that isn't pessimistic, that still invests optimistically, and maybe even a 60-40 construct, but introduces things like hedged equities to address the possibility of significant equity downturns, introduces a kind of fixed income that addresses the possibility of bond dislocations. And then, so if you do that, and you're an investor, and you have that portfolio set up, you don't need to be looking over your shoulder. With all this, so you look at the markets this year with tariffs and some really scary down market days. And so if you'd had this portfolio, it's already, before it even started, designed to address that, right? So that's really important, is that we need to think about portfolios more from a consumer perspective rather than just how do you match a 60-40. That's number one. And then number two is that we have this entire proactive communications construct that says, okay, let's think about down markets. Okay, how's the portfolio designed to address them? And then what are we going to do when they happen? What's the specific course of action? So I do that for the six biggest behavioral challenges. And so by doing that, then it's like when the fire goes off and you know what the drill is, right? You're not just all scrambling and running around what to do. You know exactly what you're supposed to do. And then once, if an advisor repeats those things enough for investors, then they know what to do. And that's our recipe for addressing, bad decision making around portfolios. So I find it very satisfying to have gotten this messaging out. This really represents over 20 years of real work we've been doing as investment advisors and investors. So it's not just like stuff I'm pulling out of the air. This is being executed by advisors across the country for a long time.
Yeah, I really like that. I think there's a layer that people don't always think about. It's thinking ahead. A lot of times I feel like when the world reacts, you react to it. And I think anticipating what the world's going to do, or what economy, or what your life, I feel like you can translate that to anywhere. A lot of people just react. And I feel like understanding what's going to happen and then reacting the according way and putting those steps in place where you're not going to, have the essential freak out everyone else has, because you put those stops in place, is huge. Yeah. So that kind of ends with the interview portion. I, just have some follow-up questions.
Okay, sure.
Every time we do this, I'm going to talk about this every time to remind myself. I want to have those flashcards. Yeah. With those questions on there, and I want to just rip them throughout the room and see if I can hit some cameras and do some fun stuff. I'm not throwing this.
Okay.
But I will one day have some stuff I'll throw. Obviously, my company is the word Attain Wealth in it. Yeah. So I like to follow up with this. What does the word wealth mean to you? So, I think for most people, what wealth means is how am I okay relative to the people right around me? Do I perceive myself as wealthy? And I think that drives a lot of our emotions around it. But, I would say that if you could divorce yourself from that idea and do some of the things that we've talked about here today, or think of it in the way that we've discussed today, which is what are your objectives? How do you want to live? Right. What do you want your life to be like? Right. And then if you meet those objectives, and you could forget about what's going on around you in terms of am I keeping up with my neighbors? I think that would be a path worth really thinking about. And, I would say be open-minded about it too. So for example, I live in New York City, and insane cost of living. Right. Right. So at a certain point, you could just say well, do I need this expense infrastructure? Is there a way that my life could be better, if I was in a different part of the world, or whatever? So I just think living according to your terms, having a schedule that you want, being able to be with friends and family that you want, and being able to have a level of independence
Because that's a big thing, right? I mean, most people don't have the luxury of deciding what their schedule is. They're demanded. They're sort of on a track and on a path. So trying your best to create a level of independence where you make the decisions over what you do rather than someone else.
I like that a lot. And I think there's a lot of good tidbits here, because this kind of all flows in. If you listen to some of the podcasts, a lot of these ideas kind of resonate with each other. The guest I had last time on, we talked a little bit about this. He kind of had an idea, like a mental shift. He didn't want to do what he was doing at 40 anymore. And his big thing is he felt like he was living every day for the weekend. You know, you're kind of going through the motions.
Wow, yeah.
And I feel like you know.
Interesting.
Yeah, so this kind of fits along with that, and the idea that you're constantly comparing yourself to others and not actually taking a look at what you're doing and what you want to do.
Yeah.
You know, it can cloud your judgment. You know, it makes you miserable, if we're being honest here. If you're constantly comparing yourself to others, you know, I forget what the quote is. It's, you know, comparison is the thief of joy or something like that.
Yes, exactly.
I'm 2 for 2 on these, because I never know if I'm going to say them right.
Okay.
The last one's iron sharpen iron. So kind of on that note here, what's one mindset you kind of had that kind of shift the way you thought about stuff? I mean, I would maybe, just based on our conversation, shift back to when you were in 7th grade. I don't know if there's a time when you kind of said, hey, I'm going to think this way differently, and what that was.
It's interesting you point that out. Yeah, so the idea of like just being on your own and starting a company and doing it that way, and even almost just if that, you know, that might have just been an accident. I don't know if that was even purposeful.
Best accident you ever made.
But there is another thing that's worth mentioning is that the shift from this sort of this, and I'm not saying in a negative way, but just sort of a very limited perspective in that town in Kansas and liberal, where everyone had a certain idea of how the world works, and then to leave that and say like, oh wow, right, like many of those assumptions, you know, maybe aren't valid, and so I think that helped to drive a contrarian perspective, which is that like, wow, maybe you don't have to do things the way everyone else thinks you do, and can I be bold enough and try to be smart enough to change the way that works? And so think about this, like when I started in this business, 100% of people just said like conventional portfolio, and that's all there is. And I think what I said is like, I don't think so, because I think there could be losses that would pulverize investors, and I built a whole company based on that, right? And I think we're just now getting to even where we're going to grow a lot. So being able to say like, even if everyone is doing something a certain way, you know, if you feel like, well, maybe that's not right, it doesn't really make sense to me, and then sticking to that's huge. And I think there's a lot of things out there, even though we think everything's so efficient right now. I mean, imagine this basic idea around investing is flawed that almost 95% of people use. How many other things are there out there like that? You know?
Yeah, no, I like that a lot.
Yeah.
And then kind of the last question here is, if you met your younger self, what's a piece of advice you give him when he was just starting out?
It's interesting, because what I want to say is just be confident in who you are, and don't stress out and have any anxiety along the way. But that's super hard to do. And at the same time I say that is that, you know, a lot of investment ideas or business ideas fail. Right. So how can you be confident in knowing that? There's a great book I'd recommend people read called The Originals that talks about the fact that it's not often just going out and taking a huge risk that is successful. Often what people do is they dabble in a business while they keep their day job and start it like that, so they lower the risk of doing that. But yeah, get a confidence level. If you decide to do something, execute it with confidence, I think is one of the advice I would give myself.
It's funny that's your thought here, because so my son, I have a 7-year-old, he started playing soccer. And the biggest thing we've kind of been telling him lately is be confident.
Oh, wow.
You know, whatever the decision is and whatever you decide to do it.
Yeah.
Whether you fail or fall on your face, you're going to lose out on so much by being hesitant and holding back. If you just do it, even if you make a mistake, you learn from it. So, but I really appreciate you taking the time. I know you.
This has been fun.
Did you fly out here, or was it?
I flew out yesterday. I'm flying back today. So yeah.
So I would say you came out to here just for this, but I would be lying. So, but I appreciate it. Thanks again.
Excellent.
Great as always. And if you listen to this, you know, definitely make sure you follow along. We got some other good, cool guests coming along, and as always, appreciate it. And we'll do this again soon.